Folks, welcome inside the studios of Power Talk, located at 3733 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Please go to our website, powertalk.live, download our free app, and stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. And we're delighted you could make us part of your day today, because we have one of the most amazing writers. It's always very hard to describe improvisational instrumental music, but we have a gentleman who was able to manifest this stuff in an auditory fashion and then be able to cogently write it out so that it made sense. He's been a promoter of the America's only true art form for half a century at least, and was deeply and intimately involved with a gentleman that I'm blessed to be doing a film documentary on, Stan Getz. Dan Morgenstern, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
I have done over 4 dozen interviews for this documentary. I know the classic line from Zoot Sims, he was a nice bunch of guys, or he was a bunch of nice guys. And I understand that he was a melodic genius and had incredible time feel and huge ears. But I really want to talk to you about Stan the man. And one thing that caught my attention with Stan throughout this whole thing is that he was a very loyal person. And you talk about this. I was watching a video of you talking about Stan, and there's this pivotal period where he had been overseas in Sweden for quite some time, and Coltrane, the modal period of jazz, was taking over. Train and Sonny, Ornette, Miles, they were starting to elevate, and Stan, being a competitor and obviously very gifted, wanted to come back into the fray. And I think you were talking about this time when he returned to the States, and you were the only effing writer to greet him. Was it in that? Was that the? Can you?
Well, yes. It was when he came back from Scandinavia. He was in Sweden. He married a Swedish girl, and he also spent a lot of time in Denmark. And when he came back, there was an announcement that went out. I don't know who the press agent was or anything, that he would be arriving. In those days, people still came in on ships rather than on planes.
You're right.
So,
right. That's right.
At the time, I was with Metronome magazine, and which was at one time, the only competitions at Downbeat, but it went downhill and eventually died. I had the dubious distinction of being its last editor. But anyway, I was the only person who showed up to meet Stan, and he never forgot that. From then on, we were friends. And as you said before, he was loyal. That's an example, I think, of his loyalty. He never forgot that. And, he was a misunderstood guy, I think. A lot of people didn't really, understand what he was all about. But among other things, of course, he was a musical genius. But I also happen to like him a lot.
No, and I know that you, as most people were, being that he was. Do you consider him? Could you relate him to a painter or a poet, or everyone? I've gotten every artist from Van Gogh to, and then people have also considered him Einstein, called him Einstein. I mean, where does he fall with you? Can you peg him with an analogous artist?
Well, if I were to, it's hard to do really meaningful analogies with another art form, but probably if I was to pick a painter, maybe I would pick Monet, and a poet. I don't know. That's hard.
You say Monet?
Monet? Yeah.
Why Monet? Why Monet?
Because Stan was a virtuoso. He mastered the saxophone, and Monet was a virtuosic painter. Those beautiful things he did with with the water lilies and all that, and he was a master with the brush, just like. And there's a kind of poetry to his paintings, and Stan could be a very poetic player. He had a beautiful sense of melody. I know that one time on a blindfold test with Miles Davis, they played a Stan Getz record for him, and he said, he said he admired Stan. He said he has so much patience with melodies, and that's how, for instance, the bossa nova stuff that he did became so successful because of his melodic ingenuity. That was it.
Well,
It's
go ahead.
It's hard to find analogies with other art forms.
Prior to him coming back to the States, were you in awe of him, and that's why you liked him, or were you genuinely friendly? You liked him as a person, and were not. When did that awe fall away for you? Could you talk about a story when you actually bonded with him personally?
Well, I didn't really know Stan personally too. I had seen him. I remember the first time I saw him live. Already, of course, I knew him from records, but in those days, this would have been around 1950 or so. Birdland had Monday night sessions, and this was one particular one where they had Stan and Lee Konitz opposite each other, each with a rhythm section, and that was the first time I'd seen him live, and was very, very much impressed with him, which had already been from recordings, but we didn't really get to know each other until that return from Scandinavia. That was. I had one interlude with him personally. The first time we got personally involved. After I got out of the Army, I went to Brandeis University on the GI Bill, and at that time, George Wein had the Storyville Club in Boston, which is a great nightclub. And the university had some, funds for bringing in artists for concerts and things. And they'd done a lot of classical stuff, but they hadn't done any jazz. Let's get some jazz in here. So when Stan was at Story, I spoke to George and I said, would it be okay when you have somebody at the club, if we brought them to the campus? And he said, sure, that's fine. You just don't mind me. I have nothing to do with it. If it's okay with the artists, it's fine. Any day but Sunday. Sunday he had afternoon jams, so he didn't want to let guys go on a Sunday. So I talked to Stan, and he was looking. The first thing he asked was how much were we willing to pay. He had a nice quintet at the time, and so we brought him in, and he was at that time, he played beautifully. The concert was a big success. But there wasn't very much personal involvement. He thanked me, and he was friendly, but we didn't really, connect in any particularly, intense way. So it really wasn't until that return from Scandinavia. But after that, I really got to see a lot of him, and I was fortunate to visit him at this beautiful house that he had up on the Hudson, which had once belonged to George Gershwin.
You got the press release because you were really that quintet up in Brandeis. That was Jimmy Rainey and Bill Crow and those cats. Is that what that was?
It wasn't that great group, the one that actually recorded
Sure.
in Boston with Tiny Khan and Rainey and Teddy Kotick and no, that wasn't it. It was a little earlier than that. I think Bobby Brookmeyer was with him there.
Oh, I dig.
Yeah.
This is so interesting.
So,
this is so because I know in reading the book, I was blown away by the fact that you actually were at the opening of Birdland. That to me is such a cool thing. And, just for the audience, because listen, this movie is going to take off. If it takes off, it's going to take off because Stan was a star and he was a beautiful. Could you talk about what made him? Obviously, he was a virtuoso, and he was so melodic. Like I read these quotes you were talking about, everything he was singing all the time, always singing, through his horn. But can you talk about, sort of the who he, like Stan the man, what made him the sort of Marlon Brando or the James Dean of the 50s? A lot of people don't even realize he was a monster bebop player, but the person Stan Getz, he was a complicated cat. Can you break down?
He was.
Can you break down and from your perspective?
He was complicated personally, and there were people who didn't really understand him too well. And you mentioned Jude Sims' famous quote: "He was a nice bunch of guys," But if there was one thing about him that remained a constant, was his dedication to the music. I saw him often, and he never made a bad record, and I never heard him perform in any other way than than perfection. He was just a master musician, and it wasn't only the melodic stuff; it was also the speed and the control. Stuff like that thing he recorded, Parker 51, which is a version of Cherokee. Jesus, boy, that's something.
And the stuff he did for musicians.
He was very consistent about that. And as you know from the book that you mentioned, what's the author's name?
It's Donald Magan.
Yeah. Well, he mentions that Stan said that he was never sober when he recorded, but that may well be true. Maybe he did say that, but for instance, the session with Jimmy, with Jimmy Rolls, there was no indication that Stan was stoned or anything like that. He was in perfect control. And these were mostly things that he was recording, songs for a couple of Wayne Shorter things and so on, first time, and boy, it was just a wonderful demonstration of his musicianship. I did the notes for that LP, originally LP, later CD, so I remember it very well. But the thing about Stan also was that he was an impulsive person. I'll give you one anecdote, which was kind of, it's kind of fun, but it was at the London House in Chicago. The London House was one of the nicest jazz clubs ever because it wasn't only a place for good music, but it also had wonderful food. It was a first-class restaurant. They specialized in roast beef and steaks. And on the night I came in to hear Stan, it was his opening night, there was a party right in the front row. The tables were up to right in front of the bandstand. Bandstand was elevated a bit, but the tables in the front row were very close to the bandstand. So there was a noisy party right in front of the bandstand. Party of about 4 or 5 people. I don't remember the number exactly. But they were loud, So Stan kind of politely, a couple of numbers in, asked them if they would please, be quiet. People want to listen to the music, and would you please? He said politely, didn't work. It didn't work. So what did he do? He put out one leg, put out his foot, and put his shoe right in the plate of one of the people, right on top of the steak. Mm-hmm. Boom. Mm-hmm. That was a pretty daring thing to do in terms of what the club owner might think. Now, the club owner was George Marienthal. There were two Marienthal brothers who ran the club, and he did not fire Stan or anything like that. He kind of sympathized with what he had done, and the people, of course, were incensed, but just didn't, he canceled their check and asked them to leave, and that was it. But that was Stan. He was an impulsive guy.
What I mean,
there aren't many musicians who would have done that.
No, I mean, that is I mean, when I interviewed, you must know Seymour Red Press, right?
Yes, sure.
Okay,
yeah.
So Seymour grew up with Stan in the East Bronx, and I mean, I was, how much of his upbringing do you think affected his psychological state? Because he was on the road with Teagarden. First of all, his parents were very poor. His dad could never hold a gig. He was supporting the family in ninth grade. I mean, can you talk a little bit about how that shaped his impulsivity, and also because Seymour told me that he took him to see who was it? Bob Freeman or some horn player. I forget who it was. I can't remember the name, but I'm sorry. Seymour took this guy Freeman to see Stan, and Stan played.
Was it Bud Freeman?
Bud Freeman, thank you. And after the gig, Seymour, he had not seen Stan for a few years. He was a little bit older when he was in Bill Shiner's saxophone quintet, but Seymour went up to Stan and he goes, "Get that MFer out of here. He hates me. I know he hates me. I know he hates me." And it was the farthest thing from the truth. I mean, Freeman was floored by Stan. And it was this sort of, it was this paranoia and lack of confidence. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that upbringing and how it molded his psyche.
Yeah, well, I don't know much about his early childhood or anything like that. I know that he got a scholarship. He never pursued the bassoon very far, but he was, he was a talent from the very beginning. And I know he went on the road with Jack Teagarden when he was he was underage, because Teagarden had to sign a document that he would be his guardian.
That's right, the truant.
That's
right.
Jack Teagarden, Jack was a great trombone player, but he wasn't exactly the most perfect guardian for a young kid. And what Stan told me about Jack was, the first thing he said very briefly, he said, "Jack taught me to drink."
He taught me how to bend my right arm. Yeah. No, I mean, the truant officers had to go track him down, and then Teagarden said, "No, he's staying with me, and I'll be his guardian." But I mean, this, you said he was. I've heard this from you a couple times now. He was hard to understand. Because can you give so on the bandstand, these people are getting drunk in the front row and he steps on their steak. Okay. On the flip side,
well, they weren't getting drunk; they were just noisy.
Sure, but I know it was
talking very loudly right through the ear.
But can you
annoying?
Can you get, when you talk about he was hard to understand? Can you talk about the tender side of Stan, whether at Irvington or a time when, because he was schizophrenic. He had a bipolar disorder that was never really diagnosed. And I'm trying to get at this idea of saying beyond beyond the virtuosity, all right, setting aside the virtuosity of his musical ability, how about the love that you guys developed after you showed up after his return from Denmark in roughly 59, 60, the softer side of Stan?
61, yeah. Well, he obviously, his children were very fond of him, Beverly and Steve, both speak very warmly of their father, and we can see in photographs, when they were little together. And obviously he was a good family man in that sense, because he hadn't had a very good childhood himself. And he could be very friendly and, warm, but he could also be, I remember one time in Chicago, also I mentioned the London House, he and the guys, that was when he had Chick Corea in the band, and they came over to my apartment just to hang out and listen to records. And Stan had a habit, he called Chick Chicky Baby, and Chick obviously didn't like that, but he consistently called her that. Even though Chick obviously did not like it. But, he was teasing him a little bit. As far as being, I can't think of any particular incident that would demonstrate his kindness to people, but I can tell you that he was in a way that you wouldn't expect, although it's perfectly understandable considering his upbringing, that he was insecure. Because one time, this is back now, I'm already at Rutgers with the Institute of Jazz Studies, so it had to be in the 70s. He called me and he said, Dan, he said, they have offered me a teaching gig at Stanford University, and he said, what am I going to do? I didn't even finish high school. How can I, how can I teach college kids? I said to him, you're Stan Getz. Jesus, these kids will hang on every word you have to say, and all you have to do is talk about music, and that backwards and forwards. But he was really, insecure about doing that. He did take the job, and he did do it, and of course he did fine, But it's just an indication of how insecure he was about his education. When it came to music, he knew everything there was to know, and he was intelligent in other ways too. But he did feel insecure. And that was, I think, also contributed to some of his maybe, personal relationships, which weren't always, 100% perfect.
This Peacock's album, we need to vet this considerably, maybe at another time. I mean, when you were in a room with him producing or writing up something for Downbeat, can you talk about the kinds of questions and then his answers to those questions? Was it about, I mean, what I'm trying to get at is, I know for a fact, Steve, I've done a couple interviews with Steve, and Stan was always puzzled and baffled as to why, whether it was Desafinato, whether it was Girl from Ipanema, why these songs became popular hits. He himself didn't even understand it. Did he even understand his genius? Is that one reason he went mad sometimes? Because to me, it was, I don't know. I want you to just open up about what, from your perspective, this guy he had all these innate gifts, couldn't explain it, That's what I've gathered in my research.
Well, it's always hard for people to explain, what if they have a gift like that, what really causes it, because it's something that you're born with, in a sense. But I can tell you I didn't interview Stan very often or anything like that, but I did a blindfold test with him. The blindfold test, they still have it in Downbeat, where you play records for a musician and you don't identify them and you get his reactions to it,
right.
His or her reactions.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fun to do that, and he was very good. He was very perceptive. One of the things I wanted to play a little trick on him, he made one record where he plays a solo on alto. It's an obscure recording. It was made under the name of the Mills Blue Rhythm Band, but it was really a studio band that was put together for a California session. And I guess they called on Stan, and he had the chair where there was an alto solo in the book, so he played it. And it's the only example of that on record. And it had been back in the 40s, and this was, in the 70s. So I figured he might not recognize this, but he recognized it very quickly.
Unbelievable.
And
told
me, what the circumstances were.
This CD is it commercially released? I mean, I've been looking it up because I saw you mention that before. Was there one tune with the alto, or the whole album he played alto? And has it ever been?
No. He just solos on one tune, and there weren't that many recorded. I think maybe 4. And this is still the '78 era. It just came out as singles, and they were eventually put on an LP. I think Don Schlitten put them out on one of his labels, Onyx, I think it was. I did the notes for it. That's how I came to remember it. But that was one thing that I played for him. And, but some other things I played, I got a very, interesting and intelligent response to all the things I played. One thing I played for him was Lee Konitz version of You Go to My Head. I think it's called Hugo's Head, and it's, they never state the melody. And Stan's reaction to that was interesting. He said, if you can't think of something that's better than the original melody, you should forget about it, So this is an example of what he thought of that's why he was so good with things like the bossa nova things, which have beautiful melodies, and he respected the melody, he respected the song, and that's why he was so good at it. Look at Early Autumn, how that solo, it fits so well into the arrangement, and it's so melodic, and it's so reflective of the tune, that was what he could do. That was his gift.
Talking to Dan Morgan,
but he was very swift with the answers. His reactions were interesting, and he was, part of the fact of what he felt about teaching college kids. He was a highly intelligent man. He may not have had a good education, but he was pretty damn smart.
What kinds of things? I mean, I know you're right, but could you give an example outside of music that made you realize he was not just informed but actually very bright?
Yeah. Well, we would have, I think we did talk about politics. I don't know what was happening. Things were always happening. We live in interesting times, as the old Chinese curse has it. There was always something going on. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was in Chicago, and we were actually hanging out on the beach. In Chicago, the beach is the lake. You're right on the lakefront. You know Chicago, don't you?
That's
You know,
I know, Lake Michigan there.
Yeah, it's the only city where you can, you live right in the center of town and you can walk to the beach in 5 minutes. It's not like an ocean beach, but so a bunch of us went swimming. He was actually flirting with some girl there, and that stuff. But we were talking politics, and he was he was very good about that. And all in general, he was an intelligent man. He wasn't like not that I'm not saying that a lot of musicians were dopey, but there were people who were good at certain things, but not terribly sophisticated. But Stan was, he was a highly intelligent person.
Do you talk about could you just talk about his, how beautiful a person he was, and the kind of, I don't know what the right word is, but he was, women just were in love with him. Did you see that firsthand?
Yes. Well, what I was just talking about there, he was establishing a little, temporary relationship with a woman there who was very attractive, but it didn't take him long, to succeed in seducing her, if that's what you want to call it. Yes, he was, he was a handsome guy. He was could be very charming, and that was one of his strong points.
How in charming in the sense of he just had to look into their eyes, or he had to? What did he say? Certain things?
Well, no, but he knew just how to say the right things to a woman, and that's being a charmer.
Talking to Dan Morgenstern here on the Jake Feinberg Show, having a ball. Were you privy to what he was doing on the West Coast in the 50s in his small band work? Did you get a chance to see him? When you were working for Metronome, did you get a chance to travel out there? Because he was
no, I didn't, not in the 50s. No, I didn't. That was before I got active. I really started writing. Yeah, I did start in the late 50s, but I didn't get to California until sometime in the 60s. The first time I went to LA, I don't Monterey Festival or something. No, I didn't catch anything live of that part of Stan. Most of New York and Chicago was where I would see him. Also in Boston, yes. Boston.
Yeah, of course. This is. Did he ever play the same song once? Did he? What I'm talking about is I'm fascinated with this idea of melodic improvisation and not being too formulaic. Just with the ideas that were coming out of his horn, did he ever play the same solo once?
You mean more than once?
Yeah,
is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think he ever repeated anything. I remember, since Early Autumn was such a hit, that this was relatively early. He had some prominent records before that, but that was a big hit for him. It was a big hit for Woody, but his solo became famous. I didn't ever hear him repeat that exactly. No, I don't think he didn't do that. And there was like Lester Young, whom he admired so much. He was Lester Young was his inspiration. And the story that he left Stan Kenton's band because he had an argument with Stan about Lester. Stan apparently didn't think very highly of Lester Young, so they had this discussion about Lester, and Stan quit the band. didn't want to work for a band leader who didn't like Lester Young.
Yeah, there was also a story in the Magan book. In the Magan book, I think with Kenton, he took the where the music stand. Stan had memorized all the tunes, and he had put the stand away. And Kenton was like, "No, we don't want people staring at your shoes. You need to put that." So they had a contentious relationship.
Yeah.
What was the vibe like at Irvington? I mean, can you talk about when you became, especially when he was having, how much writing did you do when he was cranking on, Louis Bonfa, Jazz Samba 2, gets Gilberto. Can you talk about going up to the mansion at the peak of his popularity?
Well, I don't think when I was there in Irvington, I don't think it was quite the peak as yet. But I know that he eventually, with the big bossa nova thing, and they made him record again and again. He got a little bored with it after a while. Enough was enough. He was looking for something different, and but as long as it was going on, of course, it was very good for him financially. And if he hadn't liked it to begin with, those melodies, the Jacobean stuff, they're beautiful, and he really knew what to do with that. But he did get bored with it after a while, and that's just, normal for somebody like him. He was a great musician, and he needed something else to stimulate him. Yeah.
Sure. I'd love to. You're one of the best people to ask about this. Stan was a junkie. I mean, he had serious drug problems, and I wonder about if you could talk about the culture of the jazz scene in the 50s and whether or not. I mean, Teagarden taught him to drink. By the time he was in the Four Brothers, they were all four of them, Al Cohn, Zoot Sims, and Serge and Stan, they were all heroin addicts. Terry Gibbs told me that in L.A., Stan was in withdrawal, and they had to literally tie him to a bed because he was enraged. My question is, if you weren't on junk in the 50s, that Birdland, the height of the popularity of jazz in my mind, if you weren't on junk, were you not trusted?
No, I don't think that's the case at all. The heroin thing was a curse. Before that, you had guys who would be drinkers, and you had pot smokers, and that was great. Marijuana goes very well with music. It's
absolutely,
perfect.
Absolutely, nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with it. But the smack, the heroin, that was really bad. It not only did it get in trouble with the law, as it did Stan at one time when he held up that drugstore. That was most peculiar thing to think of him, doing that. But
he went. What's funny is he went chest.
He went bad for everybody. But I don't think that it was a matter of not trusting people who were not on junk. There were always, usually, when you had these famous bands, quintets or whatever, there was always somebody in the band who was not, a junkie, who kind of took care of business, and it wasn't a matter of not trusting them. On the contrary, I think junkies knew that they had to rely on somebody who was straight, to take care of at least the minimum of business. So I don't think that was the case at all. No.
I'd love you
But
to.
it was sort
Yeah.
of, it was terrible for Woody Herman was one of the nicest guys I ever knew. He was a wonderful guy, and he had a whole band full of junkies at one time. Practically not everybody, but he had so much trouble with these people, and you had to feel so bad for him. With all that, who needs it? Fortunately, it did not last that long, but it unfortunately also killed some people. We did lose some people on account of that.
Was it? Did it have? Is there validity in saying that even though Bird never intended it this way, because he was so far ahead sonically than anybody else, that everybody was trying to get to that point, and they thought that getting to using junk would help them get there.
No, he made a point of telling people that didn't have anything to do with it, that it didn't make you play better. That wasn't what made him great, and he told people that don't think that that's going to make you play great. It doesn't do that for you. But it was unfortunate that he sort of set the stage for that. He didn't mean to, but that's the way it was.
How about? Can you talk about the last how what's amazing about Stan in 1985, he actually went cold turkey and sobered up, and then within a year he was riddled with tumors, and he could see his mortality. And I wanted you to talk about how that humanized him, and if you could talk about the last memory you have of interacting with him.
I don't know if I would say that it humanized him, but it brought out the best in him. He fought this, and he played so beautifully. That was when he and Kenny Barron did these great things together. And I did see him the last time I saw him was not long before he passed, and I heard him, in a club, and then went to the dressing room to see him, and he was changing, so he was stripped to the waist, and I was amazed that even in that late state, how strong he still was. He having played all those years and used his musculature also for that. He was still a very strong physical presence, and yet he knew that he didn't have long to go, and he fought that very bravely and went on playing as long as he could, and still played beautifully to the very end. So that that really brought out the best in him, and it showed that he basically was what I always thought of him, that he was a good person and he had a strong character. He not what some people thought, that he was a bad guy,
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, what was the nicest thing? How do you know that he never forgot that you showed up at the boat that day?
Well, because he mentioned it, not every time we saw each other, but he did mention it.
Yeah. I did.
He remembered it. I mean, this was in 1961, I guess, or something.
Right there, because I'm telling you, in 61, this is what I want to talk to you about. Is in 61, he had this band with Scotty LaFaro. Did you see that band?
Yes. Of course, the last time I saw them was I think the last time they performed, which was at Newport, the Newport Jazz Festival, when it was still in Newport. Yes. That was a big blow to Stan when Scott, died in that accident. That was terrible. And Scotty was such a wonderful, wonderful player. My God.
Do you feel that? I mean, I guess the question, as best you can. I mean, my theory, and I mean this takes away from. I don't think Stan was. Do you feel like he was? a plotting, planning person, or did he walk because of just his natural gifts? He walked into he was able to create vocabulary of music completely innocently, meaning that he didn't try to set things up. He didn't necessarily have these visions. It's just it was something that was a mercurial sort of innate kind of thing. I mean,
Well,
whereas some people would say, you talk to people. I was transcribing an interview I did the other day. Let me bring it up here. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, you go back to any kind of certain musicians. They had vision. They had a vision of where they wanted to go. They had a vision of what they wanted to do and the kind of players that they thought that should play together. I feel with Stan, it was more kind of just, I don't want to say dumb luck, but I mean, he wasn't skiing. I don't know. Can you help unpack that?
Well, I think we have to look at things here in a certain way. He had a natural gift. He was a genius. There was something like, Louis Armstrong or Mozart, that people are born with a great gift. And he had that, and it came out very early, but he didn't coast on that. Stan was a very conscious musician. He was very aware of what he wanted to do. He chose his material very well when he was recording. He knew how to surround himself with musicians that fit in with his conception. I never heard him with a bad group, when he was the leader. He was always conscious of things. Like to give you an example, when he played Carnegie Hall, he always insisted on having the amplification turned off. Most jazz musicians didn't pay any attention to that. Said, this is Carnegie Hall, it has beautiful acoustics, I don't want any amplification. Don't want a microphone. That's one example. He was very conscious of what he was doing as a musician, and that's the way he chose his repertory. He always found great songs to record that nobody else recorded. He also was a great talent spotter. I mean, he's the guy who found Horace Silver in Connecticut.
Unbelievable. He found all these Gary Burton. He found. I mean, all those guys. Those. I mean, you know better than me. I mean, Art Blakey and
part of his strength. That he was such a great player that he could surround himself with people who were strong talents in themselves, like Horace, like Gary. He wasn't afraid of any competition. He really wanted to surround himself with people who were his equals as far as musicality goes. He had very high standards. He knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't somebody who coasted on his talent. He knew what he wanted.
What did you think when you heard that he had tried to kill himself?
Oh God, I could hardly believe it, but I just felt that he must have been, extremely natural. I mean, that sounds like a platitude, that he must have been extremely depressed, to get to that point. But fortunately, But then on the other hand, the way he fought the cancer, that's the opposite of that.
What do you mean fighting the cancer, aside from seeing him physically not deteriorate? I mean, like how much? I mean, what is that? Yeah, go ahead.
He went on and worked and played, as long as he could. He didn't let it, There were other people who might have just said, "Oh, I'm going to die, so I'm going to stop," whatever. But he went on as long as he could, and he just rose to a final greatness at the end. There wasn't any decline at all in his artistry, and that shows a strength of character. I think that's unquestionable.
If you were to, if you were going to see the Stan Getz documentary, A Man and His Horn, what would be something that you would most want to see in that film?
What I would want to see is a recognition of his stature as a musician, and also appreciation of him as a human being, contrary to some of the things that you hear about him, and just to see him as a fully dimensional human being, not just a guy who played great saxophone, but Stan Getz.
Could you just give a glimpse into this paradigm, human being, the human part of it? I mean, that's what we're trying. I've gotten enough stories about Stan the Devil. I want to make him a likable person, because he was, and so that's, I mean, we've been cooking here for almost an hour, and what kind of humanistic stuff can we pull out of this thing? Because, it's like the dude's getting, he's knocking the Beatles off the pop chart, and he's putting his foot through the door of his home, and he's getting the cops called. I mean, I'm just trying to get to this idea of, you just made you said you wanted to see a full vetting of the human being Stan Getz. Can you give me some humanity to go on here?
Well, I think maybe, some of the things I was talking about do bring that out, but have you talked to Beverly? Have you talked to,
the family? Absolutely. Absolutely. Of course, the family.
Well, I think, this may sound corny or whatever, but I think the bottom line is that nobody could make such beautiful music without also being a human being that had beautiful qualities. It doesn't work. It's not something that the devil gives to you to make beautiful music like that.
Where is Stan Getz the greatest saxophonist of all time, in your opinion?
Well, he certainly is one of the greatest virtuosos of the saxophone. I mean, as John Coltrane said, we would all play like that, sound like that if we could, but no question about that. But it's not just his virtuosity, the way he, could handle that instrument, and but what he put into it in terms of feeling. That's what made him great, not the technical mastery of the horn, but the beauty of the melodies and the creativity that he put in there. That's it.